Under the harsh floodlights of a desolate shipping yard, Inspector Elias Thorne lay bleeding, rain pooling around him, while his life ebbed away with every shallow, rattling breath. Next to him, Fenris, a wounded German shepherd once cast aside by the very department he served, pressed his warm body against the dying man, refusing to abandon the only human who ever saw his worth. Subscribe to the channel to witness this extraordinary bond and follow the story to the end. Please comment with the city you are watching from, so I can see how far this mission for justice has progressed. The rain battered the rusted metal of the shipping containers, each drop slicing through the silence like a warning. Inspector Elias Thorne gripped the steering wheel of his patrol car, his eyes sharp and cold, and a gaze that rarely betrayed a flicker of doubt, even in the dead of night. At his side, Fenris shifted his weight. He was alert, steady, and the worn patches on his service vest were silent testaments to years spent on the edge. To most of the precinct, Fenris was just another retired K-9, too unpredictable to trust and too aggressive to keep on the force. But for Elias, the dog was the only presence that made the darkness bearable. Unit 42, check the storage container at the south dock. The radio crackled with static. Owner called in, said someone has been breaking in after hours. Elias sighed, his thumb hovering over the receiver. Copy that, he replied, his tone holding more fatigue than caution. Fenris caught the shift in his partner's voice, his ears pinning back in a silent, instinctual warning. It's probably just another copper thief, Fenris. Let's get this over with, Elias muttered as he eased the car toward the farthest corner of the lot. The container sat awkwardly beneath a flickering halogen light, its heavy doors cracked open just enough to reveal wet footprints leading away into the shadows. Elias pushed his door open, his boots landing in a shallow pool of oily water. Fenris circled him instantly, his nose skimming the asphalt as his hackles rose at a faint chemical scent, drifting from the open steel. Stay close, boy, Elias whispered, reaching for his flashlight while ignoring the anxious, erratic rhythm of Fenris's tail against his thigh. Fenris suddenly paused, his body becoming a rigid line of muscle. He let out a low, guttural rumble. It was a warning Elias had learned to trust over 100 missions. But tonight, routine and pride clouded his judgment. It's fine. We clear this quick and we go home, Elias said, stepping ahead with his hand resting on his holster. A sudden sharp scrape split the darkness from behind a stack of wooden pallets. A figure lunged, a blur of a dirty windbreaker and flashing steel. Elias barely had time to turn before the blade cut through his uniform, biting deep into his side above the hip. Pain jolted his world into a red haze. Fenris didn't hesitate. He launched himself forward, his jaws snapping for the attacker's throat. "Get off!" the man screamed, and the knife slashed across Fenris's hind leg, slicing deep into the muscle. Blood splattered the wet pavement as the dog bit down harder, forcing the attacker back into the maze of containers. The man wrenched himself free, dropping the bloodied knife as he vanished into the storm, leaving behind only the metallic scent of fear. Elias staggered, his hand pressed to his side as warmth spread rapidly between his fingers. Fenris. Help! Elias gasped, his knees buckling as his vision began to tunnel. He tried to reach for the radio, but it fell from his numb fingers, sliding into a puddle. Fenris limped toward him, a trail of dark red following each step, but the dog refused to let his partner slip into the void. Every movement cost them both an agonizing price, drawing new lines of pain on old scars. Stay awake, Elias. Don't you dare close your eyes. The dog's desperate gaze seemed to scream. Fenris did not whine. He pressed his massive body beneath Elias's shoulder, propping him up with a stubborn loyalty that had survived every precinct betrayal. Together, inch by agonizing inch, they began to crawl toward the warehouse office doors. The cold cut deeper with every step, and the rain drenched their wounds, washing blood away in thin, red rivulets. Elias's breath rattled in his chest. He wanted to scream, to give up, to let the darkness take him. But Fenris kept going, dragging his partner forward with a defiance that reminded Elias of the day they first met at Animal Control. Titan had been labeled unfit for service, a stubborn dog freshly scarred and locked in a cage. No one wanted him, but Elias had seen a refusal to surrender in the dog's eyes, the same fire that was keeping them alive now. A shadow appeared in the glow of the security lights, someone huddled beneath a soaked blanket. Fenris bristled, shielding Elias even in his weakened state. But the stranger hesitated and then ducked away into the night. "Please, someone," Elias croaked, but the storm swallowed his plea. Fenris pulled harder, his nails scraping desperately against the concrete until finally, the office doors gave way. Both collapsed inside onto the dirty tiles, their blood mixing with the rainwater. "Good boy, Fenris. Thank you," Elias whispered through clenched teeth. A distant voice, Sarah's voice, came through the radio, crackling with static and fear. Fenris gave a soft, guttural bark. It was the only answer he could manage to give her. The dog's chest heaved, his tongue lolling, yet he would not let Elias drift away. He nudged Elias's jaw with his nose, refusing to let him find rest in the numbness. "You stubborn hero," Elias rasped, his hand finding the thick fur behind the dog's ears. Tutti, he realized then that Fenris wasn't just staying out of duty. He was fighting for the only soul who had ever truly claimed him. The sirens grew louder in the distance, a blue strobe finally cutting through the fog of the warehouse window. As the paramedics burst through the door, Fenris let out one last warning growl before sinking to the floor beside his partner. They were lifted onto stretchers side by side, never more than a foot apart, as the world blurred into a chaos of voices and light. The blinding flash of emergency lights and the rhythmic wail of sirens dragged Elias from his delirium. However, the agonizing pain in his hip felt like a hammer blow, forcing him back down the moment he tried to lift his head. Fenris remained there, his breath hot and rapid against Elias's ear, shot to him a singular presence that prevented death from pulling him into the void. "Don't touch him. He's protecting me." Elias screamed with his remaining strength as he saw paramedics hesitate before the dog's bared teeth and warning growl. He felt the tremors racking Fenris's body, not from fear, but from the deep wound in his hind leg that continued to bleed onto the cold floor. Sarah rushed to his side, her face a blur of tears and rain. Her hands shook as she tried to hold Elias while he was lifted onto the stretcher. "You have to live, Elias, and Fenris too. You can't leave me," she sobbed, her voice lost in the chaotic din of machinery and the roaring storm. Elias reached out, his blood-stained fingers gripping Fenris's soaked fur. It was a wordless promise that they would never truly be apart. The dog licked his hand, just a gesture of heart-wrenching forgiveness and loyalty, before they were separated by the cold, swinging doors of the emergency room. Lying on the hospital bed entangled in a web of wires, Elias felt the world shrink to the soulless beep-beep of the heart monitor. His physical pain paled in comparison to the fury simmering beneath his skin as he overheard nurses whispering about a dangerous service dog lying in wait in the hallway. "He's not dangerous. He's the one who saved my life," he roared at Dr. Anwar, his breath hitching with agony. The truth of that fateful night began to crystallize in his mind like a horror movie. The attacker at the docks was not a petty thief, but a ghost from a past he had accidentally disturbed. The room door burst open, and it wasn't Sarah with words of comfort, but Commissioner Mercer in a police uniform that looked cruelly pristine. "You acted outside of protocol, Thorne, and that dog is a material disaster for the department," Mercer spoke coldly, his eyes gleaming with a malicious calculation. Elias gritted his teeth until his lips bled, realizing that the stabbing at the docks was not just a failed assassination. It was the start of a campaign to destroy every piece of evidence he and Fenris held. In the darkness of the hospital room, he understood that the real battle was only just beginning, and his greatest enemy was the man wearing the same badge as him. Mercer's silhouette vanished into the sterile hallway, but the chill he left behind felt more lethal than the blade at the docks. Elias stared at the closed door, his pulse hammering against the monitors until the rhythmic beeping sounded like a countdown to his own professional execution. "He isn't just taking my badge, Sarah. He's coming for the only witness who can't lie," Elias rasped, his voice cracking as he looked toward the window where he knew Fenris was being watched by men in suits who didn't care about loyalty. Sarah's knuckles were white as she leaned over his bed, her voice a desperate whisper that cut through the hum of the trauma room. "Trent found something in the archives, Elias. The 2018 K9 scandal wasn't about a dog failing. It was about a dog succeeding at the wrong time." The revelation hit Elias like a physical blow, forcing his breath out in a jagged gasp. Success? Fenris was blacklisted because he was dangerous. That was the official line. The official line was a cover-up for a botched kidnapping, Elias. The man Fenris pinned 4 years ago wasn't a stranger. It was Mercer's own son. Sarah hissed, sliding a grainy, blood-stained photograph onto the hospital sheets. Elias stared at the image, his mind racing through every lie he had been told by the department. He realized then that Fenris hadn't been returned to the shelter because he was broken, but because he was a living reminder of a high-ranking officer's shame. Suddenly, the heavy click of a lock echoed from the hallway, followed by the deep, warning growl of a dog who sensed the net closing in. Fenris was no longer just a partner. He was a liability that Mercer needed to disappear before the internal review board could meet. "They're coming for him now, aren't they?" Elias choked out, struggling to sit up despite the searing agony in his hip. He could feel the phantom weight of his service weapon, a weight that was gone, replaced by the crushing helplessness of a man branded as a rogue. Sarah didn't answer. She just grabbed the handles of his wheelchair and locked eyes with him, her resolve hardening into a silent pact of rebellion. "If we stay here, we're just waiting for the paperwork to kill us both. We need the original files, the ones Mercer thought he burned at the precinct shelter," Sarah whispered, her shadow dancing against the wall as she began to move him toward the side exit. The hallway felt miles long, every flickering light a potential ambush. But the sound of Fenris's claws clicking against the linoleum behind them was the only anchor Elias had left in a world that had turned its back on him. As they reached the rain-slicked parking lot, a black SUV pulled up, its headlights cutting through the fog like a predator's eyes. Elias realized with a jolt of terror that the men inside weren't there to arrest them. They were there to make sure the officer down report was finally completed. The black SUV's tires shrieked against the asphalt, a predatory sound that snapped Elias's focus back to the lethal reality of their situation. He gripped the armrests of his wheelchair, his knuckles white as he felt the vibration of the engine in his very marrow. "Sarah, get to the driver's side, now!" Elias barked, his voice regaining the sharp authority of a commanding officer, even as pain radiated from his hip in sickening waves. Fenris didn't wait for a signal. The dog lunged between the wheelchair and the approaching vehicle. His back arched, and a guttural, terrifying snarl ripping from his chest that made even the men in the SUV hesitate for a heartbeat. "I'm trying, Elias, I'm trying," Sarah gasped, her fingers fumbling with the keys as the first car door of the SUV swung open to reveal a man holding a silencer-equipped pistol. The first shot hissed through the air, shattering the rear window of Sarah's sedan and showering them in jagged diamonds of glass. Elias felt a cold rage override his agony. He realized then that Mercer wasn't just trying to arrest them. He was cleaning house. "Go, Sarah! Don't look back!" he roared as she floored the accelerator, the tires burning rubber before catching traction and catapulting them into the rain-slicked labyrinth of the industrial district. Fenris pressed his heavy, warm head against Elias's hand in the back seat, his amber eyes reflecting the flickering streetlights with a desperate kind of resolve. "They're following us. 2 blocks back, Elias," Sarah cried out, her eyes darting to the rearview mirror as she swerved through a narrow alleyway. Elias leaned his head back, his breath rattling as he looked at the blood-stained folder in his lap. The 2018 K9 scandal wasn't just a police report. It was a death warrant. They won't stop until they have this, and they won't stop until Fenris is silenced, he whispered, his hand tightening on the dog's scarred ear. Suddenly, a second black vehicle drifted out from a side street, ramming their rear bumper with a sickening crunch of metal that sent the car spinning toward the edge of the shipping canal. "Brace yourself!" Sarah screamed, her voice cracking as the steering wheel fought to rip itself from her hands. The car slammed into a row of rusted containers, the impact jarring Elias's hip so violently that the world flickered toward black. Through the haze of smoke and pain, he saw the SUV doors fly open and a figure step out. Not a faceless henchman, but Jackson, the rookie Elias had mentored, holding a heavy-duty restraint pole. "You shouldn't have dug this up, Elias," Jackson said, his voice devoid of the respect it once held. "Mercer wants the dog, and he doesn't care if you're attached to the other end of the leash." Fenris lunged through the shattered window before the car even stopped moving, his teeth snapping inches from Jackson's throat, as the line between partner and protector finally dissolved into a war for survival. The impact against the shipping containers was a symphony of screaming metal that jarred Elias Thorne's very soul. His vision fractured into jagged streaks of white light. But the primal, gut-wrenching snarl from Fenris in the back seat pulled him back from the edge of unconsciousness. "Fenris, no! Stay with me!" Elias choked out, his voice thick with the copper taste of blood and the suffocating scent of deployed airbags. The dog ignored the command, his powerful hind legs, wounded and trembling, finding purchase on the shattered glass of the rear window as he launched himself at Jackson with the precision of a heat-seeking missile. Jackson screamed, his rookie bravado evaporating the moment Fenris's jaws clamped onto his forearm. The heavy restraint pole clattered to the pavement. She was a useless toy against a creature that had lived through 100 nights of betrayal. Sarah kicked her door open, the frame groaning as she dragged Elias from the wreckage. "We have to move, Elias. The backups are coming, and Mercer isn't going to miss a second time." "Leave the wheelchair, Sarah. Just get me to the office doors," Elias rasped, his left leg dragging behind him like dead weight as they scrambled toward the flickering halogen light of the yard's main office. Behind them, Jackson was upright again, fumbling for his service weapon with his good hand. "You're making it worse, Thorne. Just give me the dog and this all goes away." Elias didn't look back. He could hear the rhythmic, heavy thud of Fenris's paws on the concrete, the dog limping but refusing to yield an inch of ground. They burst through the office doors, the air inside smelling of stale coffee and impending doom. Sarah slammed the bolt shut, just as a hail of gunfire splintered the wood from the outside. "They're not even trying to hide it anymore," Sarah whispered, her hands shaking as she pulled the blood-stained folder from Elias's grip. "They can't afford to, Sarah. Once that video on the drive hits the servers, Mercer's legacy becomes a prison sentence," Elias replied, his breath rattling in his chest. Fenris collapsed at his feet, the wound in his hind leg seeping dark red onto the linoleum, but his amber eyes remained fixed on the door, waiting, watching, guarding. "Sarah, look at the roster in that folder. Look at the names of the dogs Mercer ordered disposed of in 2018, Elias commanded, his fingers digging into Fenris's fur for strength. Sarah flipped the pages, her eyes widening as she reached the confidential margin notes. Titan, Max, Daisy. Elias, they weren't just aggressive. They were the only witnesses to the kidnapping attempt by Mercer's son. The twist settled in the room like a layer of ice. Fenris hadn't been blacklisted because he failed a temperament test. He was blacklisted because he had pinned a high-ranking officer's son during a botched crime. Suddenly, the radio on the desk flared to life with Mercer's cold, triumphant voice. "Officer down in the South Dock. Suspect is armed and dangerous. Authorized lethal force on the animal. He's using the official channels to execute us," Elias hissed, struggling to stand as he leaned against the desk. The office window shattered as a flashbang grenade rolled across the floor, the world erupting into blinding white light and a high-pitched scream of static. Elias felt hands grabbing his collar, dragging him toward the back exit, but he could hear Fenris barking, a sharp, urgent sound that reached through the chaos. He blinked the spots from his eyes just in time to see Mercer himself standing in the doorway, his gun leveled directly at Fenris's head. "Last chance, Vance. Give me the drive, or I do what I should have done 4 years ago." Mercer sneered, his mask of authority finally cracking to reveal the monster beneath. "You won't win, Mercer. The truth is already uploading," Sarah screamed from the corner, holding her phone high as the progress bar flickered toward completion. Mercer's finger tightened on the trigger, but in that heartbeat, Elias didn't think about his career or his leg. He thought about the dog that had dragged him through the rain. He lunged forward, throwing his body over Fenris just as the room exploded into a final deafening volley of gunfire. The silence that followed was heavier than the storm outside. Elias felt a searing heat in his shoulder, but beneath him, he felt the steady, rhythmic heartbeat of his partner. Fenris was alive. The dog licked Elias's cheek, a rough, warm gesture that tasted of survival and absolute unspoken love. Footsteps thundered in the hallway. Not Mercer's men, but internal affairs and the news crews Sarah had alerted hours before the world went to hell. Mercer stood paralyzed as the red and blue strobes of a dozen cruisers filled the yard, his legacy crumbling into the dirt of the docks he had tried to rule. Months later, as the morning sun broke over the city's new K9 sanctuary, Elias sat on a bench with his hand resting on Fenris's scarred back. The badge was gone, replaced by a sense of belonging that no department could ever offer him. "We did it, boy. We stayed when the world told us to run, Elias whispered, watching as a group of children crowded around the old shepherd to offer him ribbons of honor. Fenris wagged his tail, the movement weak but certain, his amber eyes clear and finally at peace with the man who had given him a second chance. Elias Thorne finally understood that loyalty wasn't a policy or a protocol. It was the stubborn, bleeding heart's refusal to ever leave a brother behind. The mission is complete, because the only badge that matters now is the trust reflected in the eyes of the friend who saved my soul.